Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Bekele Yutute Natural Processed Ethiopia from Poem Roasting. And there's the bag right there. And Poem, based out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And this coffee is our March 2025 Coffee of the Month, as is voted on by you guys as the coffee you most want to see us review. This is Poem's first ever appearance on this channel, as they're a coffee roaster I had zero familiarity with going into this review. And in the name of transparency, I was very happy to see Poem win our Coffee of the Month poll, largely because we've had a lot of people reach out to us asking if we could review some of their coffees, as I've heard a lot of positive feedback about this coffee roaster. So I'm definitely looking forward to discussing them, as this right here is day 41. And recipe we went with for this coffee was our standard recipe at a 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 96 degrees Celsius, about 205 degrees Fahrenheit, and I like this one best through the Chemex, which indicates a more medium grind roast profile for this coffee. So I should say that this one did turn out a slight bit more developed than the other coffee that we are also reviewing from Poem, and I was surprised to see it turn out that way. That being said, in general, I would say that the profile based off the two coffees that we are working on from this coffee roaster are pretty much on par with a lot of the other Philadelphia-based coffee roasters that we've had in the past that I can remember. So I'm thinking of coffee roasters like Makina, Reanimator, Ultimo, something along that sort of lines, which a lot of people would indicate as being on the more medium light side of things, with this one being perhaps a slight bit more developed than that, so not necessarily overly more developed than that in that sense. Hopefully that gives you a good idea. With all that out of the way, let's go and start discussing this coffee. Day 15, first impression through the V60, and the coffee itself was very surprising. As I kind of mentioned, there was a little bit more developed presentation of the coffee, especially within the brew itself, as I could kind of see based off of the way that the coffee was brewing that it was a slight bit more developed than I might have expected going into it. Outside of that, there was a little bit of a fermentiness in the brew itself. However, it didn't quite translate into the cup, as it was very clean for a natural with some very well-defined stone fruit qualities as well. Also pretty berry-esque with plenty of the traditional Ethiopian characteristics to it. And one thing I found to be extremely interesting about this coffee is that the notes they have listed on here are notes that you would more often see with a wash processed Ethiopian coffee as opposed to a natural processed. And as a result, when I was getting much more of these natural qualities, so I was thinking a lot of a very well-defined stone fruit and a lot of berries, it was just kind of interesting to me to see that the notes they had listed were lemon, stuff along that lines, wildflower honey. So the sort of thing is usually a lot more in line with wash processed coffees. Day 18 through the Chemex, and more of the developed qualities are pronounced this time around, as it is cut through by some very fresh fruit qualities once again, as it's very reminiscent of some clean berries and stone fruits with nearly no fermentiness and just a slight bit of roastiness to go alongside it. So this coffee, as of these first 2 days, was very interesting to me, largely because it did feel like a little bit of a throwback. I feel like I had a lot more of these coffees towards the end of the 2010s, and now the natural processed coffees do tend to have a lot more fermentiness to it, a lot more funkiness in general, where this one still had a very clean presentation of these fruit qualities to it. It just seemed to be hindered ever so slightly by the overall roastiness to it, but at the same time, I really just appreciated the way the fruit qualities were presenting themselves. Day 21 through the April brewer, one of the last days we have with the April brewer still, and the coffee has been pretty consistent, especially in the clean, fresh fruit sense, as it's both prominent in the aroma of the coffee itself, but also translating very well into the cup. It does feel a little bit cleaner in terms of the dark berry components and the stone fruit-like qualities, but also a little bit of citrus and still a little bit of that roasty quality as well. So I did appreciate the presentation of this brew method as well. So far, as of this moment, I do have to say that a lot of fruit qualities were very well accentuated and highlighted regardless of the brew method that we went with. Day 24 through the V60 with some lower temperatures, 93 degrees Celsius. I feel like it didn't need too much of an adjustment, but at that same time, it was the least impressive it had been to this point, as it's starting to offer a little less intensity and liveliness to the fruit qualities in general, with a little bit more of the roastiness. So I felt like we really didn't need to lower the temperatures. I was finding much better results when we kept them a little bit higher. Day 27 to the Chemex with the same adjustments, and I found that the coffee was pretty enjoyable through this brew method, even with lowering the temperatures, which did lead me to believing that this brew method in general just seemed to be better with this coffee, as we found that it was offering a more prominent stone fruit and berry scents yet again, and a lot of cleaner qualities to it. I could even say that I felt a little bit of some coconut-like qualities as well, with the roastiness mostly coming through at the very end in the cool down and finish itself, but overall still generally a nicer experience. Day 30 through the V60 with our standard recipe, and the coffee does still offer a very nice experience, as it might have dropped off ever so slightly from some of the earlier days, though in hindsight it might have just been that I didn't really enjoy it near as much in the V60 as I did with the Chemex. A lot of the biggest sticking points to me is that the roastiness hinders the overall experience ever so slightly. Now, I don't want to say that it just was so dominant to the point where all you could really feel or experience from this coffee was a slightly roasty, slightly more developed quality. And I feel like it could be a little bit of a sticking point and hindrance to some people, because I know there are a lot of our viewers that like these super light, ultra light sort of coffees that don't have any of these qualities to it. And yes, I will completely be transparent and straightforward. It's present, you're definitely feeling it, but I feel like it's at times overmatched and overpowered by a lot of the very prominent and defined fruit qualities to this one. So definitely just wanted to highlight that and make that note. Day 33 through the Chemex with our standard recipe, and the coffee has been very consistent with this brew method, as there's still a very prominent berry at the forefront with some cleaner stone fruit qualities in a mango-like sense as well. Honey florality has been consistent as well, and I haven't really noted it that much as of this moment, mostly because I've just been so impressed by the fruit qualities, which did seem to be at the forefront for me. It's still kind of wild that they don't have any of the either stone fruit or berry notes listed on the coffee itself, as those two seemed to be the most prominent and pronounced qualities for me within this one. Still some of the slightly roasty qualities, and it always seems to be my very last note within these coffees, mostly because it's kind of the takeaway experience I do have right at the forefront. Wonderful fruits, but towards the end a slight bit of that roastiness to it. And then day 36, final notes we have through the Chemex with our standard recipe, and it seems like the best experience of this coffee is still a lot of the berry and stone fruit qualities, as they're very well defined. And I've been extremely consistent within this note, especially with this brew method, mostly because it's a natural Ethiopian coffee. Oftentimes natural Ethiopian coffees can lack any sort of depth, and they can be just very intense, very one note, very direct. And I'm not even saying that this coffee was one note, it just was very direct. And throughout the entirety of it, these two notes right at the forefront, berries, mango, the blueberries, which I found to be the most abundant of the berry qualities in this one, as well as that mango, are definitely present. Complementary citric qualities, which, even though it's a note they have listed on here, is definitely secondary to those much more prominent fruit qualities for me, with plenty of the strong floral honey sweetness coming through in the, I want to say, intermediary and that slight roasty quality towards the end. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have a lot of level 4s, so let's go through those, and we'll start with the finish level 4. So even with the roasted quality that I've highlighted quite a bit throughout this review, there's still a very nice quality that is presented with in the finish. I mentioned on some of the earlier days I was able to get that coconut because it's kind of put together. So you're getting the fruit qualities in the forefront and also in the finish, but at the forefront it's a little bit more clean, well defined. You're getting them pretty well pronounced, and then towards the end you're getting not just those fruit qualities but also that roastiness that does seem to go hand in hand with it as well. So finish, maybe not necessarily my favorite experience within this coffee, but it is made up for by the very prominent and intense fruit qualities of it. Sweetness level 4. And I'm very happy with the sweetness at a level 4, especially given that it is presented within the fruit sense. And anytime I'm able to get a lot of fruit sweetness to it, especially when it is presented in a slightly cleaner sense, I'm going to be very happy with that. Abundance of blueberries, abundance of mango, abundance of those very fresh fruit qualities throughout the entirety of this one. So very happy with that being there at that level 4 mark. Acidity level 4. I'll be completely honest, that surprises me that it's as high as it is, and kind of thinking about that, I guess I can kind of see it. It did present a fair bit of brightness to it, and even then it's a little bit more in that citric sense. I think you'd go either between the 3 and the 4, and I think I was being maybe a little bit generous with the overall brightness of this coffee, but level 4 is where we opted to put it nonetheless. Berry fruit level 4, and once again, interesting to me, no berry notes are listed on the bag itself, but for me the most abundant quality at the forefront was the blueberries, as it does remind me a lot of those old school blueberry bombs that a lot of people really enjoy about natural processed Ethiopian coffees that seem to be a lot more rare these days. That being said, it's very pronounced, very well defined for me, so level 4 where we opted to put that. And I think the most important part of that is that it's not fermenty or funky in any sense. And I can't quite recall having too many of those blueberry qualities that seem to lack that, as it's just kind of interesting the way that a cleaner blueberry presents itself versus a lot of the more modern naturals, which do seem to have that fermenty quality that always seems to hinder it in a much more perfumey sense. Stone fruit level 4. I still felt there was enough of the stone fruit qualities. Once again, interesting to me, it's not listed on here, but the mango specifically was the most abundant one, as it definitely had a little bit more of that natural characteristic with the stone fruit quality. So mangoes were opted to put for that stone fruit. Let's go ahead and move on to level 3s. We will start with the florality level 3. They do have that wildflower honey. I can definitely see it, and I think that's a component maybe of the other qualities. I'm also thinking that slightly more candied sense to it. I can see honeysuckle, so I can definitely see a little bit more of that floral sense in that. So level 3 where we opted to put it. I should really just continue to highlight the fact that those two fruit qualities were just so abundant and so prominent that even with the floral honey quality to it, as well as that citric quality to it, they're both at a level 3, mostly because the other qualities were just much more pronounced within this one. So citrus fruit, level 3, I can see a little bit of that lemon. I can see it in the brightness as well to give this coffee some additional depth. But for me, it wasn't even worth highlighting the majority of the time, mostly because it was tertiary to the other qualities that were within this coffee. Caramel level 3, I think it's going to be very interesting. I think it's going to be much more interesting when we discuss the other coffee from Poem, as I think it's a product of the roasting machine that they are using. I think they use a Mill City, if I have that correct. And it's not overly common for a lot of coffee roasters these days to use a Mill City. So I think that might be the main reason that scored as high as it did. But I think that goes along the lines of that wildflower honey that they have listed on here. And then two last things we're discussing, we'll discuss them side by side, and that is the smokiness there at the level 2, and that is the cleanliness there at the level 3. Actually, I shouldn't skip over this body level 2. It was a little bit lighter bodied in general. Ethiopian coffees usually tend to be, but going back to that, smokiness, cleanliness, that's what hindered the overall cleanliness. Now, if there wasn't any sort of those roasty qualities whatsoever, I have no qualms or issues putting this at a level 4 in terms of the cleanliness, especially given the way the fruit qualities were presenting themselves. So as I'm kind of looking at this, that was the big sticking point to me, is if there's a little bit of that roasty quality, it's going to have to keep the cleanliness down from that level 4 mark. And with it being a natural processed coffee, I'm still happy the way the fruits presented themselves, given that there's a very strong lack of fermentiness to them in general. So I'm very happy with the cleanliness, even if it is scoring here at the level 3 mark, because I can deal with maybe a slight bit of roastiness in place of fermentiness or funkiness. I would have that trade-off, I would say, most of the time, especially if we're going to say that trade-off does present a much more prominent blueberry quality to it. So that's just kind of the way I'm taking it and discussing it. So as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it is a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee, I would say it's generally more positive. I know this coffee's not necessarily going to be for everybody, but for me, I found a lot of beauty from it, and I did enjoy it the vast majority of the time that I was working with it, largely because it did give me a little bit of nostalgia. It did give me a little bit of a throwback feel when it comes to these natural processed Ethiopian coffees. I don't know why it's so hard to find coffees that present this way anymore. As I kind of mentioned, that roasty quality is something that I'm willing to make as a trade-off if I'm going to get such a loud and intense blueberry quality that lacks that fermentiness. And I think the bigger issue for me when it comes to these modern natural Ethiopians is that they all seem to have that just very strong fermenty quality to them, where this one seems to lack it, and that's always going to be a very nice selling point to me on this coffee. What's also very interesting is just how much I deviated from the notes that's listed on the bag itself, and I'm not entirely sure what to make of that. I think that maybe a lot of what Poem was getting and the way that this coffee presented itself was just different from the way that I perceived it. Even then, I do find this one to be about as close to a more modern berry bomb as you can possibly find these days, so massive credit to Poem on this one. I think they did a nice job of it, but that does kind of take it into the type of person I would suggest this coffee to. And I do have to continuously highlight and focus on the fact that it's just a slight bit more developed, and I would say the majority of people that watch our reviews tend to prefer, as I'm still not saying it's necessarily too far along that spectrum, but I know at this moment that a lot of people have tended to lean a lot more in the lighter profile direction in general. I just want to get that out of the way first. But at the same time, if you're able to look past that, there's a lot of beauty in this coffee, especially within the fruit qualities. They're all presented in a very sweet sense. And for me, that's always going to be a winner when it comes to a natural, especially given that they're not presenting an overly funky or fermenty sense to them. kind of the best direction I can point somebody towards in this one, and also the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Bekele Yutute, natural processed Ethiopia from Poem Roasting. Thank you for watching.